Well, welcome. We are happy that you're joining us on this journey. We are actually in a journey here. This is Scates and Paul Cuny. Paul Cuny, he's an author, keynote speaker. He just wrote this. He has written this book, his second book, Nehemiah People. And so he is the president of the Marketplace Leadership International. So if you can purchase this book through Amazon as well, Nehemiah People. So my name is Lance Scates, like I said, and we love to study the Word, and I have been studying the Word for maybe 40 years. I'm not a theologian, nothing like that. My area, it's in the IT, so information technology and the healthcare industry. But for all these years, I have read the Word, have applied, have learned. So what we're going to share here, and the theme, our journey, it's to discover the prophetic voice of what God is saying to us today. And we are going to the Old Testament. We may go a little bit to the New Testament, but we are focused in those minor prophets. So in the last episode, we were studying about the Book of Habakkuk. Now we're going to study the Book of Haggai. And so this book is very small. He is one of the smallest, let's say, prophets. And what happened is that God gave him a word, and it's only 2 chapters. I'm going to try to give a context for you that's listening to us here. To understand a little bit of the history. Where did this prophet come from? What time in history of Israel did this prophet came about in the prophecies and everything? So just a little bit of context in history here. This book is going to touch about priorities. This book is going to touch about rebuilding a temple. Something was lost. And there are other themes as well. But speaking of God's desire, God always, he created man and woman to have this fellowship. He created as his image, and always with the goal, with the purpose of fellowship, of communion, being one with him. That was the purpose. And so God, through Moses, then we have the tabernacle of Moses, and we have reading in the Old Testament, we can learn a lot through all those, those departments or compartments of the tabernacle. But our study here, it's about the temple, because there was a person who understood the heart of God, and he wanted not that God would dwell in the tabernacle. He wanted to establish a temple. And we are talking about David. And he had this desire. And he even spoke with the prophet at that time, Nathan, about building this temple to God. And God was pleased, but God said, it's not going to be you, David, who's going to build me a temple. It's going to be your son. So the name of David, it's interesting because it means beloved. And then we have the book of, we have the name of Solomon, the son. His name is the peaceful one. So we see that David, who was David? He was a shepherd. He was a warrior. He was a worshiper. And he became a king and a priest. And so 2 aspects very important here in order to build a temple. It's really to be what? To be a priest is to be a king as well. We're going to see this kind of pattern as we study here. But so since we're talking about the temple, one thing that's unique about the temple was built 1000 BC approximately, and Solomon, he reigned. God gave peace through all his reign. And David, he had stored so much gold, so much wood, so much, everything that Solomon needed for the temple. And it took 7 years to build that temple. That temple was magnificent. It was something out of this world. And really God blessed and gave understanding how to build that temple there for Solomon with wisdom and everything. So it took seven years to build that temple. That temple lasted approximately 414 years. And so from 1000 to 586, that's about 414 years. This number, we're going to get a little bit into numbers here, 414 years. It's a very unique number, and it has to do with the fountain of life. So we're not going to get into that, but it comes, the number 18 speaks of life. In number 23, if you multiply 18, multiply by 23, it's life, life and life. So it's just for you to study. You that's watching us, you can go after these numbers. And so in 586 BC is when the Babylons invaded Judah, and the northern kingdom has already taken by the previous empire, Syria. And so in 586, it's when the Babylon invaded and destroyed the temple. The first temple of Solomon, took all that gold to Babylon and everything. So that was about 70 years. 70 years later, the second temple was built. But between 586 and 520 BC is when Haggai, the prophet, came up, showed up, and God gave him a word. That's number 66. 66 years later, after the first temple was destroyed, 66 years later, God raises this prophet Haggai. And it's interesting, the number 66, because we find also in the book of Isaiah, there are 66 chapters. We find also Jacob bring his family to Egypt. You remember Joseph's story? And there were 66 souls there in Genesis 46, speaks of Jacob bring the family, 66 souls, into Egypt. And with the family of Joseph, which were 4, we get to the number 70. So I'm just throwing those numbers to you. The number 70, it's completion as well. But anyhow, I just wanted to see if, just to inspire you with these numbers. Numbers are very important. God created the numbers, and we don't have time to get into the numbers much here. But let's go forward here.
Let me add a few things to what you had to say there. First of all, prophets typically have a specific, a unique message. There's cessationist theology that is out there today that says there is no prophets. There are, of course, teachers and pastors and evangelists, but there are no prophets and apostles. That's what the cessationists say. In other words, it has ceased with the death of the apostles. But the interesting thing about prophets is God raises prophets up with a particular message, and Haggai had a particular message. And just to put a little history in this, God sent through Cyrus, who was at the time king of Persia. Cyrus sent Zerubbabel and the high priest Joshua back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple that had been destroyed, as you stated. And they began to rebuild the temple. Now you can find this. Haggai and Zechariah were contemporaries, so you can read these two to get a glimpse of the times. So they went back to Jerusalem, and they laid the foundations. They began to rebuild. Now Jerusalem in that day was devastation. The people were in survival mode. They were barely able to survive. They had lost a sense of who they were. They had lost the sense of the families that they were part of, which is very significant because the respective families, the tribe of Judah, that was there, they were praisers. The sons of Issachar, the tribe of Issachar, they were experts in farming. They had particular, those families each had a particular anointing. The Levites were a family of priests, and they had lost this sense of who they were and what they were. And one of the reasons was the temple was devastated.
Right.
And so at the end of the 70 years, God sent Zerubbabel and Joshua through the king Cyrus, who was a heathen king.
Yeah.
He sent those two men, Zerubbabel of the tribe of Judah, who was assigned as the governor of Judah, and Joshua, the high priest, who would oversee, both of those men would oversee the construction of the temple, the second temple,
Right.
which, again, you can go back to the book of Zechariah and you can see he goes into a lot more detail. There are more chapters and he goes into more detail. But the specific prophetic call of Haggai for his day was to encourage the people as a prophet to continue the construction of the second temple. And being a general contractor, if you read the book of Zechariah, it talks about as they were rebuilding it, there were some older people that came back with Joshua and Zerubbabel, and they remembered the original temple in all of its glory, Solomon's temple in all of its glory. And so when they saw the new temple being built, the second temple, from the rubble of the first temple, there was weeping and crying, but the Lord nonetheless encouraged them to rebuild the second temple.
That's true.
So now we're in chapter 1.
Chapter 1. And just to add to what you're saying, Paul, approximately 50,000 people came. So it was about 300 from Israel. Then you have about 7,000 servants. So a total of 50 people came from the Babylon, and they came the same route that of Abraham, because Abraham also came from the land of Ur, and he did that journey in the region of Babylon until he reached the promised land. So these 50,000 people, they came following the same route as well. And we can ask, why only 50,000? What about the rest of all Israel? We can ask that question. I know that Babylon at that time was a prosperous nation, and so those that have all that prosperity, why I'm going to go back to a wasteland, desolated and everything? In other words, I'm leaving prosperity. I'm going to trade prosperity for poverty. So who knows? A lot of those people from Israel, they decide to stay in Babylon. But these 50,000 that you mentioned, Paul, a lot of them, they were Levites, they were priests, and they understood the promises of God, because God brought the people of Israel from Egypt to the promised land, not to Babylon. Babylon was not where the people of Israel was supposed to stay. They were supposed to be in the promised land. So they wanted to fulfill God's promise and everything. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, it was actually Persia. They came from Persia.
Persia, right.
Cyrus was king of Persia. And at the time, Persia was the most powerful nation in the world because they had conquered Babylon. Babylon, 70 years before, had destroyed the city of Jerusalem and the temple. The temple. And then Persia conquered Babylon, and Persia became the big dog in the Middle East.
Yes, Babylon was a short kingdom of 47 years only, And then in 538, 39 is when the Persia with Cyrus came, and he released everybody to go back. So in 536, it's when Zerubbabel and Joshua the priest, they arrived there it's interesting, in Israel. And it was a desolated land and everything. And they started to go, as they arrived, they offered an altar to God and everything, like Abraham did. And they started the first 2 years. They started with the foundation of the first temple, restoring the foundation. And just for us to understand that in the first 2 years, they were in the right track, right? They were there to build the second temple. But then what happened? It happened that the Samaritans, these were Israel from the north as well, northern kingdom. They had already mixed with the nations around, the Gentiles mixed with the Hebrews there. So the Samaritans, they wanted to help. They asked to help to build a second temple. But Zerubbabel and also the priest said, "No, you don't have part with us here. We have nothing common. You have nothing common with us to build the house," because it was a mix of let's say, of nations there, and they had their idols as well. And who knows, they would like to intervene and influence on the building of the second temple, breeding their idols and everything, So they said, "No, you will not be involved in restoring the second temple." And the Samaritans, who knows, they got upset, and they hired professionals to come and discourage the people. And they also, after Cyrus was gone, other king came as well and decreed that to stop the temple. So there was a lot of struggle in order to rebuild to build the second temple. And
what's the 21st century application of some of this?
Right. We know through the new covenant that we are the temple in Christ. So as the temple of the Holy Spirit, as we find in Corinthians, speaking of a temple, we cannot have an idol in our hearts at all, just like the temple there did not have any idols. In our hearts, there should not be any idols as well. There should not be any mixed. There should not be any influence of this world, but it should be really consecrated, a life of sanctification for us that live today. Like we read. Mm-hmm.
You said 50,000 people went back.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Went back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple.
Right.
How would you categorize that 50,000? Because there were a lot more than 50,000.
Yes.
In the comfortable city of Susa, which was the capital of Persia.
Right. So,
what would you label them as? Remnant. It was a remnant.
It was a remnant. It's true.
Yeah. And God has always had a remnant.
That's
and
true.
He's got a remnant today.
They do. That's true. That's totally true, Paul. And those, in other words, just like in the times of Daniel, there were those that kneeled to the statue there in the Book of Nazar and everything, but there were 7,000 that did not kneel. Those were the remnant as well. The same thing today. We have those that call believers, but who knows? Only God knows if they need a renovation, or they need a deeper touch of God, really to understand that the true religion is to take care of the widows, take care of the needy, which is also not to be contaminated. So the remnant are those that do not allow, that's a true religion, they do not allow to be contaminated. So these 50,000, they saw the promised land, they gave up, who knows, imagine the family, imagine the sacrifices of those people coming back, doing all this transition to a land that's wasted and everything. but God was with them. That was a promise of God, and the prophets were there. And so the first 2 years, they started right, but then for 14 years, Paul, for 14 years, they stopped. What did they do? It says that everybody, I mean, the priests, the Levites, the people, the singers, all of them, they settled in their own cities. In a lot of this story, it was written from Ezra. You read the book of Ezra, it tells a lot of what happened. He came maybe
yeah, there's some more to this that is interesting. First of all, there was a large Jewish community in the city of Susa. God began speaking to the prophets that it was time to go back.
Right.
They knew that because of the Torah, which was all they had at that time, they knew that there was a season of time that they were to spend in captivity because of the sin of the people. Okay? Mm-hmm. When the prophets started saying God is going to send a remnant back, as you mentioned, Susa, it was the capital of the world in those days, because that was Persia was the most powerful nation. Mm-hmm. So what happened to all the people who said, it's pretty comfortable here? Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, we have a good business going. Yep. We can still go to temple. Yep. We can still
improvise.
I mean, we can still worship God. Maybe what we need to do is we just need to give a few extra, a little bit extra in the Jerusalem Relief Fund. Right. And just to help those go back. But why would we leave this prosperous, comfortable
life
place that we live to go back to the unknown? Because remember, when they went back to Jerusalem, there was no Google map.
Nope.
There were no airlines. You couldn't catch a flight.
That's true.
You couldn't see what it was like. All they knew was that it was devastation. We don't know what happened to them who stayed.
That's true. We
don't know what happened to them. We know about the remnant that went back.
That's right.
At the voice of the prophets to rebuild the temple.
That's true.
So are we ever going to get to Haggai chapter 1?
We are, aren't we? And I know that you that's listening and is watching this video, we want you just to clarify that what we are discussing here, this is our interpretation. There are many different types of interpretations. So this is one of interpretations that we see. We are just sharing what God has revealed to us. So just starting from, we get, our time is almost done, but we're going to start on the first verse just we mentioned all these. I mean, there's so much more that we could say for this introduction, but let's start in the book already.
The reason that we're spending some time on this is because this is one of the most significant events in the history of Israel, the rebuilding, the release of the remnant by the declaration of King Cyrus to return to Jerusalem after 70 years of captivity. Yes. And their first job was to rebuild the temple. Mm-hmm. And that's why it merits all this discussion.
That's right. And so in the book of Haggai, if we want to outline, we can follow this kind of outline of the book. We're going to see in the first chapter a depressed people. Then in chapter 2, you're going to see determined people. You're going to find a discouraged people, defiled people. So these are some of the outlines that we can have of this book. But just to start today, just chapter 1, verse 1. In my version, Paul says, "In the second year, Darius the king, when on the first day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, saying. So let's just stop there a little bit. The word was given to the prophet, but to speak to whom? To one that has a position of governance, of leadership, Zerubbabel, and you have also the position of a priest. So Zerubbabel, the name means a seed of Babylon. He was the governor of Judah. So it was important for him to return to the promised land. Why? Because he was the survivor member of the royal line of David. And God had promised that it's through the sons of David they would be on the throne of Israel forever. So it was very important that Zerubbabel, his return to Israel, to the promised land. And we have the priest Joshua, and his name means God saves, or God is salvation. So it's interesting that one has the position of governor, and you have another priest, and you have, going back to the first temple, you have two columns, right? Those two brazen columns at the porch, at the first temple, you have Boaz and Jachin. So it's very interesting. One was a kind of a governor leadership under Boaz.
Actually, Boaz was a landholder.
Yep.
And he was from the tribe of Judah, but he was a businessman.
That's right.
He had a large farming operation. Jachin was a renowned priest during the time of David.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. Well, our time is over, Paul. We had a kind of a long introduction today, but do you have anything to add? You would like to add, Paul, to this?
No, let's just
Yeah.
Go to the next
verse, something like that. Yes. So you that's watching us, go to the book of Haggai. It's only 2 chapters, and we encourage you to really read each verse very carefully and ask the Holy Spirit to reveal to you the principles, the truths that are hidden behind those verses and everything. And again, we are just sharing what God has spoken, what God has shown to us. God, it's always revealing a new layer of revelation. So this is one interpretation. There are many different interpretations. But if we just hope that you're encouraged and you can go with us on this journey. We are trying to bring from the Old Testament to our days today what God is speaking to us. And there's a lot of truth that we need to get into what God is saying to us. So it's a joy to have you, and we hope that you can join us in the next episode. God bless you.